Yo, guys, we're talking about necromancy today. For those of you who don't know, necromancy is like a ritual you perform, a ritual or the activity of bringing back people from the dead, like resuscitate them. Like, and there's like a lot of evidence in the ancient medieval times of using black magic and astrology together to bring back people from the dead. And I 100% believe it's not something you should actually do or perform. That is for a reason. Let's just get into it.
Necromancers of our favorite fantasy games and stories were based on a very real practice that tried to cross the boundaries between living and dead. This is the crazy history of necromancy explained.
Sorry, what is a necromancer?
Necromancer is someone who plucks the dead from the cold earth, breathes new life into them.
Necromancy, it turns out, wasn't originally about raising the dead at all. It would appear that the general term necromancy refers to any and all divination practices that involve the spirits of people who have passed on. The precise details of just what that includes has changed a lot over the course of centuries, but necromancy got its start when we began forming complex ideas about the afterlife. Once we believed spirits went somewhere, it wasn't that far-fetched to believe that if we just knew how to dial the celestial telephone, we could reach them. The idea goes back a long way. Shamanism, which predates Greek antiquity, involved practices where a shaman would enter a trance. Once in that state, the shaman would guide souls to the underworld, rescue the souls of the infirm, deliver messages to the dead, or ask them questions. It has long been believed that spirits have access to knowledge that the living don't. Ancient shamans could tap into the dead's wisdom to gain insight into what the spirits knew. It's also argued that necromancy's origins go back further still, to the Stone Age practice of ancestor worship. Religious beliefs that venerate the dead are among the oldest in the world. Rituals involving the remains of those who have passed on go back to the Neanderthals and to Jericho, with sites dated to between 7220 and 5850 BCE. Necromancers even got a mention in the Old Testament, specifically 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 3 through 25. A medium is the focus of the story. She's called the Witch of Endor, and she's consulted by Saul, the first king of Israel. Even though Saul outlawed necromancy and communication with the dead, he asked her to use her talisman to summon the spirit of the prophet Samuel. He wanted to know the outcome of an upcoming battle against the Philistines, and it wasn't good news for Saul. The spirit told him that he and his sons would all die in battle, and Israel would fall. It's interesting.
Yeah, there's like a lot of evidence and stuff in the Old Testament itself for necromancy. This is a practice they actually do, and there's a lot of ancient Egyptians and occult cults are also in part of this. It's so crazy. A lot of people actually wrote a lot of books about this, how to bring back people from the dead, and it's clearly outlawed for a reason. Anything you actually do or interfere with the natural cycle of life is gonna bring back a great harm on you. I've seen that anime Full Metal Alchemist, in that the first part they like to, I don't remember the full part.
To look at how this story evolved over the centuries. Originally, it was Saul at the center of the story, and the woman was referred to as either a necromancer, a sorceress, a pythonessa, a diviner, or a medium. It wasn't until the 15th century that images started to show her front and center, summoning the spirit of Samuel, and it was only in the 16th century that she was given the title witch. The narrative shifted from being about a king who wanted to know the future to the woman who could summon the dead to tell it to him. Necromancy was common throughout Greek myth, and it was
Yeah, I was talking about Full Metal Alchemist. The main character tried to resurrect their mother using some form of transmutation, and they actually paid the price of their his brother's own body, things like this. If you're trying to do any kind of demonic ritual, or it's always a contract and always a price you have to pay, something along those lines.
dark stuff. Take the tale of Orpheus. Not only did he descend into the underworld to rescue his beloved Eurydice, but after his death, his decapitated head did some serious prophesying. The women of Thrace were responsible for the removal of his head, but even after the untimely separation, Orpheus's noggin continued to sing and speak. Eventually, his noggin ended up on the island of Lesbos. There it was discovered by the Muses and put into a cave. So many people came to consult Orpheus's head that Apollo got jealous and demanded that he stop. That's what's called skull necromancy. It's the practice of consulting the decapitated head of a person for some inside knowledge. Orpheus wasn't the only head that spent part of his afterlife giving prophecies as
Yeah, Greek mythology is wild.
part of skull necromancy. Stockholm University says that Sparta's king Cleomenes was said to have kept the head of his friend Archimedes in a jar, preserved in honey, brought out to be consulted on important matters.
Well, first, the good news. We're getting a couple of offers on the house you showed yesterday.
That's great.
Fantastic.
Magical texts from ancient Greece specify some of the ways the skulls were to be prepared in order to open up communication between the living and the dead. Pausanias of Sparta was credited with leading Greece to victory over Persia, but after the battle that kicked off the classical Age of Greece, he descended into tyrannical madness and a bit of treason. He headed to Byzantium, where he fell in love with a girl named Cleones. One night, she was brought to his chambers. The room was in darkness, and unfortunately for her, Cleones tripped and knocked over a lamp. This woke Pausanias from a tormented slumber, and he leapt up and killed her on the spot. But Cleones didn't leave. Her spirit continued to harass Pausanias. Desperate to rid himself from the haunting, Pausanias consulted with an oracle. It was revealed that Cleones' spirit would be at peace if only Pausanias returned to Sparta. Eager to be rid of the ghost, he went back. Unfortunately, Sparta was waiting to bring him up on treason charges, which they did, and in punishment, they bricked him up inside the wall of a temple. Greek oracles were consulted on matters of extreme importance, and one of the most famous was Apollo's oracle at Delphi. It was at Delphi where priestess Pythia gained access to Apollo's prophecies, but she wasn't the only oracle doing business. There was another oracle who dwelled at the top of a hill where 3 of the 5 rivers of Hades converged. Cocytus, the river of wailing, Acheron, the river of woe, and Periphlegython, the river of fire, met at a blighted land. And beneath the surface, in a ruined structure with walls 11 feet thick, sat the home of the Oracle of the Dead. It's a place spoken of in some detail in Herodotus's histories. And then there's the Necromantion of Ephra, who was active around the 4th century BCE. Visitors who wanted to consult with the dead would descend into the subterranean chambers.
People who don't believe necromancy didn't exist at all, it is in the Old Testament, and like there's countless evidence of it like throughout medieval history. For some reason, like for it doesn't have a naturalistic explanation, like people disregard it, like for that ancient mythology. For that reason.
And perform rituals in order to open lines of communication. Just how legit the oracle was is up for debate. Archaeologists have uncovered mechanical devices believed to have been used to create the illusion that the rituals were working. Still, ancient texts suggest the oracle was incredibly popular. It was even the place where Odysseus was said to have summoned Tiresias to learn what the future had in store for him. Some ancient Greek sources say their necromantic knowledge came from the Middle East, and here's where things get extra surprising. Some figures, like Moses, warned against communing with the dead. However, those who were actually doing it really didn't see anything weird, creepy, or evil about it. The Magi held major sway in Egypt, the Middle East, and into India. They were widely respected and often consulted by rulers who wanted to know what the future held. And it makes sense. The souls of the dead were said to be closer to God, and therefore had access to a wealth of information about the past, present, and future. The idea that the living could ask them about such things was perfectly normal. In Egypt, necromancers were associated with the cult of
Yeah, I don't believe in the idea the souls of the dead are closer to God.
Osiris, and this is where it gets interesting. Today, we might think of necromancers as raising the dead, but in ancient Egypt, they were behind the rituals and incantations that prevented malevolent spirits from possessing a body and reanimating it. Meanwhile, the magicians of the Sabians were said to get their powers from their influence over the stars, and they turned that power into prophecy, conjuration, and necromancy. Necromancy underwent a major change in the Middle Ages, and starting in around the 13th century, it became much darker. A practice that had largely been written off as superstition started getting the attention of scholars across Western Europe who had begun to categorize magic. First, there was natural magic, described as active endeavors, where power was drawn from the world.
First of all, a lot of things in the medieval history doesn't even make sense, like maybe the mainstream's lying about history itself. A lot of things actually doesn't actually make sense. Not just the magical aspect of it, like a lot of things, like mainstream history, about the history itself, what actually happened. It's a lot of inconsistencies. Therefore, you should not believe what the mainstream tell you. There are like mythological, surreal, supernatural things that actually happened in the medieval times.
Around the magician. Think of it as magical chemistry.
Or else there wouldn't be like an extensive written record of it. Like if things like this didn't happen.
While natural magic could coexist quite happily with Christianity, the other kind of magic couldn't. That was necromancy, which had grown from its original meaning to include black magic and anything that tried to control dark realms regular people weren't meant to know about. Basically, it came down to natural versus supernatural, and dabbling in the supernatural was something the church was vocally opposed to. The more Christian writers wrote on the subject of necromancy and other types of sorcery, the further from its original definition it got. Necromancers were suddenly almost unrecognizable from what they had been before.
Tremble then in the presence of the Necromancer!
Who?
It became a fusion of practices of different origins, including things like animal sacrifice, spells, exorcism, and astral magic. Along the way, the spirits that necromancers had been conjuring for generations took on a whole new aspect. They were confused and merged with demons, and suddenly necromancy was the darkest of dark arts. While Christian writers like Isidore and Thomas Aquinas were talking about how necromancers were busy summoning demons, actual necromantic texts were telling a completely different story. There isn't a single surviving necromantic text that says anything about making a pact with Satan, mocking God, or ridiculing Christianity. In fact, the opposite is true. At the core of a necromancer's power was the ability to command spirits to obey and answer them. That power, it was believed, came directly from God. The 14th century
It does not directly come from God. It comes from lower astral beings, and so it's involves some kind of contract itself. But you can actually study the Faustian records also. Like there's a dude named John Faust who who want to make some spirits under his command, and he paid a heavy price after his death. Like his dead body, like never moved away from the ground itself. Like, and there's always some kind of contracted stuff. Like, you do the certain things, give you some kind of the spirits will be under your command. In return, after your death, you'll be an eternal slave to the demon itself. Like, being an eternal slave doesn't have like to our perception doesn't even like make sense, but to the demon's perception, it's like a win-win scenario for them. It's never about you. It's always a lose-lose scenario if you engage in dark arts, like for a momentary command of the spirits, fueled by the 7 deadly sins of envy, rage, these kinds of things, and these demons take advantage of you. Like, so that's why anything to take part in the dark arts, like, it's not a good idea, bro.
Catalan magician Berenguer Ganel wrote, "Magic is the art that teaches one to exercise coercive control over good and evil spirits through the name of God." Necromancers tended to hold a deeply profound belief in God and prepared for their rituals with fasting, prayer, and washing with holy water. Texts suggest that the general thought among necromancers was that they were something outside of good and evil. They were capable of achieving a holy state that spirits of all kinds had no choice but to obey. So it shouldn't be entirely surprising that monks and clerics were among the foremost practitioners of necromancy, with alchemists, astrologers, and medical professionals close behind. Necromancers summon and speak to the spirits of the dead. But here's a question.
Yeah,
Why?
what's with this rock music?
Richard Kieferfer, a professor of religion studies and history at Northwestern University, believes that there are 3 main reasons for a necromancer to reach out to the great unknown. First, it could be to gain forbidden knowledge. Spirits, it was believed, could grant a summoner knowledge about the past, present, or future that they would otherwise never learn. That covers a wide range of things, from the outcome of a battle to uncovering the identity of a murderer.
How do you know my name? I know absolutely everything, Frank. You see, I'm the ghost.
Second, there was a belief that spirits could aid in the manipulation of others. For example, in the Cantigas de Santa Maria, there's a song that tells the story of a priest who dabbled in necromancy in order to compel demons to force a young girl to fall in love with him. The demons complied, and the young girl succumbed to their power, but the Virgin Mary stepped in to save her and condemned the priest to hell. And third, there are the illusions. Necromancers were believed to have the ability to compel spirits to create illusions on a grand scale. Their powers allowed them to manifest everything from grand banquets to hordes of troops sweeping across battlefields. Some of the illusions were a bit more than just images, as there are more than a few stories of necromancers summoning mysterious black horses that could take them anywhere in the world. The necromantic rituals that are preserved in historical text suggest there were actually 2 parts to the act. Not only were rituals designed to summon the spirits of the dead or demons, but there were other practices like the drawing of circles that were solely to protect the necromancers from whatever they might end up summoning. Sometimes specifics got pretty dark. It wasn't unheard of to have a component of an animal sacrifice, but sacrifices were more along the lines of offerings like honey, milk, salt, or ash. Circles, which have long been believed to have protective powers, were common along with the inscription of astrological characters and the use of magic items like candles and swords. Spells were often recited, and strangely, these sometimes called out the names of Christian figures like Christ or involved reciting prayers or psalms. At least one form of ritual required an assistant, and that was prediction. Prediction was usually done with mirrors, glass, or liquids in a receptacle that formed a reflective surface. The images that would form on the surface could only be seen by a young virgin boy. Necromancy began to fade from history post-Renaissance, but it didn't so much disappear as it just sort of got rebranded. As history moved on from the Enlightenment to the Victorian era, people started to think differently about what happened to the dead and how they should be honored. That's also about the time the Fox sisters decided to make bank. Their house was haunted, it was said, and when mysterious noises started happening, that's when sisters Kate and Maggie Fox started claiming they'd been in contact with a spirit making the sounds. They called him Mr. Splitfoot, and it wasn't long before neighbors started asking them what was going on. The first time they demonstrated their abilities in public was on November 14, 1849. From there, it escalated into national tours and the development of spiritualism, which essentially involved holding a seance to summon spirits. Even though the whole thing was repeatedly debunked, the movement continued on well past what the Fox sisters had started. It's understandable after all. The desire to speak to a loved one last time is a powerful thing. While things like the Ouija board and spiritualism have their roots in necromancy, there's also one entire religion that is based around
I don't get that. Like, this had to speak to every life is ordained on this planet. Like, every soul is ordained for a certain time. We have free will, but also like that life that we live, like how long we live, truly corresponds to our free will. Also, like, so it's always like a bad idea to go against the natural order of life itself.
the idea. That's Kimbanda. Kimbanda, which is practiced mostly in Brazil, has its roots in Africa. At the center of the religion are spirits called Eshus, Pombagira, and Ogum, which practitioners call upon during rituals known as trabalhos. The Eshus are a group of male spirits, and they're typically consulted by practitioners hoping to get otherworldly intervention in material matters. For instance, bringing someone to justice or signing business contracts. The female spirits are the collective known as the Pombagira, and they're typically called on to settle relationship issues. Often, they're asked to bring some good old-fashioned bad luck on arrival. The final spirit, Ogum, is associated with meditation and crossroads.
Never ask demonic beings, to fix a fucking relationship or like make someone fall in love with you, it's always like a bad idea. Like,
Kimbanda rituals have similarities with medieval necromancy, and that they
when you try to bend someone else's will to your own, like, it's always like a bad idea.
typically involve an offering, particularly rum for Eshus and beer for Ogum, along with food, flowers, and candles. The spirits are then asked for help according to specific rituals, which only the initiated are allowed to conduct.
Okay, let's just watch this video. This dude, like, says he knows how to perform necromancy. Like, his name is
Finkel, and I'm a curator in the British Museum.
Irvin Finkel. Sounds like a Jewish name. Like,
In the Middle East department. One of the interesting
if it's a Jew, you can, do the opposite. Like, never listen to this dude.
things about ancient magic is to, in a particular culture, look at things which are peculiar to that culture and things which all over the world people do. And most of the things that happen in ancient Mesopotamia, written in cuneiform, are more or less like the sort of things you find everywhere. So my favourite magic ritual is a manual written by an exorcist who wants to tell the future, and he wants to practice necromancy. So he's somebody who wants to bring a ghost up from where it's peacefully in the basement, so to speak, and ask it questions. And he has a special
Bro, ghosts and all these creatures, like, these lower ethereal beings, these are real. Like, people who have that much attachment to the physical material world, like, they get trapped as ethereal beings without, like, spiritual progression in their soul cycle, and they get trapped in the material physical realm as ethereal beings. And this was happen if you, like, die with a lot of envy, regret, some kind of, like, a rage if you die with that. So that's why it's very important when you're dying, you just let go of everything. Like, you should die with no regrets and be satisfied with life itself.
way of doing this. You have to get a skull, and you put the skull on the table, and you burn all this heady material to create the right atmosphere, and then there's a kind of
Yeah, it's something to do, always to do with skulls. Skull of people that's dead.
oil, which is used to anoint the skull, and then when everything is ready, this is what happens. The sun god, who really should know better, brings up from below the ghost of the dead person who goes into the skull, like that. And then the exorcist, or the specialist, the necromancer, asks this spirit a question, and you're supposed to get a true answer by
Okay, but I told you this guy's a Jew, bro. Don't trust him.
means of this skull from this dead person who's inside it. And that is a very interesting matter which I've been dying to try out. I've got a skull, but the diabolical problem is getting the right stuff for the oil, and in our supermarket you can't get all the bits. So this, I think, is something definitely worth trying at home. If you have the opportunity, you need to know who
Trying it home, bro. Don't try it at home. Like, this guy's a Jew. Like, don't try it at home. Like, 100% don't try it at home. It could fuck you up, bro. Just don't try it at home.
is going to win the Grand National. Get your great-grandfather's skull, put it on the kitchen table, bit of HP sauce, ask the question. Fat City.
Shut the fuck up, bro. What? This gotta be a bad idea. Don't try this at home. Like, this is a bad idea. I even show this video. Don't try this home. This dude's like Finkel. This is a Jew, bro. Like, yeah. So this dude, like, it's got a pretty good channel. Like, I start getting this dude do a lot of this medieval type review books.
Astrology to create talismans and to infuse do survive, and they do provide us a small glimpse, a window onto the world of medieval necromancy. What we find is a confusing, bewildering array of magical traditions. Jewish magic for summoning angels through the incense smoke atop a decorative altar, Arabic astral magic likely surviving from the times of pre-Islamic Arabic paganism, systems of demonic conjurations for the binding and control of demons attributed to King Solomon, the hermetic art of using astrology to create talismans and to infuse images with stellar influence, along with several other variant magical strands. However, one brief text surviving in a single manuscript and originating in the 14th century stands out for a few reasons. The first is that we know its author by name, and moreover, it is a fascinating attempt to systematize many of these variants of magical strands into a unified theory of astral necromantic magic. Antonio del Montalmo's De Occultis et Manifestis, the Book of Hidden and Revealed Things, is a fascinating snapshot into the theory and working practice of medieval magic, specifically the conjuration of demonic astral spirits, and how astrological, demonic, and hermetic forms of magic came to be systematized in the later 14th century. Now, if you're interested in magic, hermetic philosophy, alchemy, Kabbalah, or the history of the occult, make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica and check out my curated content on those topics in esotericism. Also, if you want to support my work by providing accessible, scholarly, and free content on topics in esotericism, here and astrologer Cecco d'Ascoli was burned alive, convicted of practicing criminal necromancy. Of course, Cecco's execution probably had as
Like there's a lot of like drastic things in the medieval period, like burned alive, someone caught doing witchcraft or witch trials, which is burned around. I think that was actually like the right move. I'm not for the death penalty or anything, but anybody who fucks in dark magic could potentially ruin the life of other people. So I think it's a pretty good idea to kill these motherfuckers off the face of the earth.
much to do with his penchant for collecting enemies at court, like it was a hobby or something. His pathological narcissism remains the most tangible aspect of his personality when you study him. However, beneath his lack of social acumen did lay the reality that he did, on several occasions, publicly lecture on the secrets of astral necromancy. Now, I've already made an entire episode just about Cecco d'Ascoli. If you want a deeper dive into this fascinating and strange medieval character, you can check out that link in the card above. But how Cecco did this is worth exploring in order to set the stage for the more radical, in fact, text, De Occultis et Manifestis. Rather than publicly lecture on how to perform necromancy, which would have been just straightforwardly foolish in the 14th century, especially considering the very much pro-Inquisition, very much anti-magic Pope, John the 22nd, was... Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, the text has two key moments in its recension history. The first is as the elucidation of necromancy, whose exact period of composition is pretty difficult to pin down, but probably between the 14th and the 13th centuries. I tend to be more on the 15th century camp myself. This text survives in various manuscripts of various degrees of agreement, despite whose core magical system is still recognizably united, if, again, not totally consistent, but this is pretty common for these medieval books of magic. Get this, one of those manuscripts was even said to have been found after demolishing a chimney in an old mental asylum in Ghent, along with some other magical implements. Yeah, a book of necromancy found in a chimney of an insane asylum. This Evil Dead sequel just writes itself. Hey, Sam, Raimi, you're out there, brother? You need to hit me up. Come talk to me. Another copy is actually held by the Vatican Archives, which is, as you imagine, so secretive and gatekeeping that it's readily accessible online. Despite what you may have read in a Dan Brown novel or over there in Conspiracy Land, the Vatican Archives, aside from recent papal papers, are downright accessible for credentialed scholars. In fact, I get the sense they want more people there to look through them, because they, the Vatican, often don't even know what's in their own archives. For instance, a random manuscript copy of Spinoza's Ethics was actually found there by scholars a few years ago that no one, even the Vatican itself, seemed to know was even in their archives. Regardless, a solid showing...
Yeah, I don't buy that. They're fully transparent. Like, there has to be something that... I'm not trying to be conspiracy head. There has to be something that they're hiding, like...
of the manuscripts of the elucidation of necromancy survives in various copies, so...
You had to be idiot to believe, like, they reveal every information to the public.
What's in this book of necromancy? Most of the text begin by providing a relatively comprehensive interlocking system of correspondences between various cycles of time, such as the hours of the day and night, the days of the week, the seasons, and the various registers of the spiritual creatures, their names, sigils, sympathetic incense, and their respective appearance and powers. This is kind of like a system of interlocking correspondences. These are all employed to create a pretty complex multi-tiered magical circle given the specific aim of the magus and the various entities which can accomplish that aim given their appointed time and correspondences. Here, a range of angels, demons, and celestial spirits can be invoked once this calculation is made. The system actually kind of reminds me of tumblers in a kind of vast supernatural lock. The text then turns its attention to the precise rituals, especially suffumigation, exorcisms, and incantations, along with the various kinds of vestments that one would wear in which and by which these beings are summoned. The magus and their team, yep, necromancy is a team sport here, are set within the magical circle and become surrounded by a virtual retinue of absolutely frightful beings who, if the rituals and purification succeed, can be bent to the will of the magus depending on the virtue or power of the beings being invoked. Though, this is no easy task. Such beings use powerful illusions in order to attempt to test the mettle of the necromantic team, trying to force them out of the protective circle. While some manuscripts do depict a containment triangle to summon the spirits into, a bit like the later Lesser Key of Solomon, most simply described being just surrounded by a whirlwind of spiritual creatures who can only be overcome or tamed by the ritual purity and persistence of the magus. Most manuscripts detail the appearance of these beings and even what one can expect when their appearance is imminent. This is, to me, perhaps the spookiest element of the text. You can see various kinds of signs appearing upon these creatures that are going to show up. In fact, these signs are often weather-related, and most of the rituals described in the elucidation of necromancy are set outdoors in a relatively remote region, presumably far away from the prying eyes of, you know, the Inquisition. You don't want to get burned alive, do you? Of course, like all medieval text and medieval magical text specifically, there is a substantial amount of variation between the editions. Angel names and their sigils vary. Some texts contain more or less rituals. Some texts include additional rituals, such as magical names of God alleged to have been revealed to Moses. This is the Semiphoros literature. There's also here accounts of various kinds of ritual furniture, especially a magical table, which is probably, very probably, an influence on the so-called Holy Table of Working developed during the Enochian sessions of Dr. John Dee. Some of them also include a path leading out of the circles. This path leads to an incense burner, I think, facing north, along with various numbers of different kinds of incense altars. It's even interesting to see that the text presents more or less internally censored or sanitized versions of itself in the varying manuscripts. Sometimes the text is simply entitled Lucidarium in Arte Magica, not mentioning necromancy there, necromantici, at all for obvious reasons. In other places, all of the spirits simply become angels. There are no celestial and demons, they're just all angels, thus I'm sure trying to head off the pass of any accusations of demonic summoning. Though if you read those texts a little closer, it's pretty clear that they're fallen angels, so there's that. In fact, the 1655 Robert Turner English edition just takes the path of prudence and just leaves out that whole Dekylo Ejecti part. They were cast out of heaven because, you know, nobody wants to be accused of summoning demons.
The word necromancy comes from the Greek words nekros and manteia, which literally means divination from the dead. The idea was that because the dead were in another realm, they had access to knowledge unknown to us, from the past, present, and future. Necromancy traditionally involves rituals, spells, incantations, symbols, and the invocation of spirits. These could be mundane or grotesque, depending on the purpose. Some practices involved wearing the clothes of the deceased or sitting for days without moving in places like a graveyard, or the home of the dead person. Sometimes, it even involved mutilating and eating a corpse as a way to call the spirit. If the person had died a violent or premature
You're mutilating eating a corpse to call a spirit. Maybe it's not for you, bro.
death, it was thought that the corpse contained some amount of unused vitality. This is why the practice of using parts of corpses when creating charms became an important technique of some
Yeah, in necromancy, they always use some part of course, most likely the skull itself.
forms of witchcraft. The practitioners of necromancy were skilled magicians who would use a consecrated
Which I think like it's like it's really like a ploy by the low demons and lower astral beings to get hooked on it.
circle to protect themselves from the anger of the spirits. There are stories
It's for a hook for the dumbass humans who actually perform these kinds of things.
of necromancers who have used this form of magic to find lost treasures and learn powerful secrets. Some used it to seek power, knowledge, healing, and protection. Some turned to necromancy for personal reasons, such as to bring back a lost lover or to communicate with deceased relatives. In this way, necromancy was a thread in the fabric of many cultures, albeit a hidden and dark thread. The origins of necromancy go far back to ancient times. It was a fundamental part of the beliefs of ancient Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, and Babylonians. But in these cultures, it didn't carry the stigma that it carries today. Rather, it was a ritualistic practice intertwined with spirituality and religion. One of the earliest and most well-known examples we have of necromancy comes from Homer's Odyssey. In this account, the sorceress Circe tells Odysseus to perform a necromantic ritual, known as a Nikia, to summon the spirit of the dead prophet Tiresias, so he could provide him guidance on how to journey back home. Nikia was a common practice in ancient Greece, where a ghost would be summoned and questioned about the future. So, this account gives us an idea about the broader cultural and religious attitudes of the time towards death and the afterlife. Similarly, the Egyptians believed in the power of communication.
I think it's 100% like it's just, but I don't. I think the rituals exist, and like you can, but I don't think you're talking to the dead. I think you're being like tricked by, demons and shit.
With the dead. There are examples of divination by the dead that appear in the Demotic Papyri, a collection of ancient Egyptian magical texts. These provide instructions on how to call various types of dead spirits and also how to send them back. The priests and magicians of the time were well versed in rituals and spells that involved interacting with the spiritual.
It's almost like a trick play by demons, You think you're actually talking to your dead lover? No, it's fucking demon. Let's pretend to be a dead lover. Because they have access to your brain. Because they have access to your mental plane. They know all the information in it.
Realm. This was about maintaining balance, honoring the dead and learning from their wisdom. It wasn't so much about summoning spirits for control. However, Judaism and Christianity has always condemned necromancy and consulting with the dead. For example, the Book of Deuteronomy lists necromancy among the practices that are detestable to God. Let no one be found among you who is a medium or spiritist or who consults the dead. In chapter 28 of the first book of Samuel in the Bible, there is the story
And God knows better for us, so I think we can trust him down on that.
of the Witch of Endor, a figure who calls upon the spirit of the prophet Samuel at the request of King Saul. While the witch herself doesn't intend harm, Saul's consultation of her and the resulting prophecy lead to his downfall, showing how necromancy was seen as a dangerous art with potentially harmful consequences. By the Middle Ages, the church intensified its crackdown on necromantic practices, increasingly associating them with witchcraft and black magic. This shift occurred partly because of a rise in superstition and religious beliefs, particularly within Christianity. There was a deep-seated belief in witchcraft, necromancy, and heraldry, and therefore a need to stifle these so-called dangerous practices. There was also a growing belief that communicating with the dead was an act of consorting with demonic forces, rather than spirits.
I know it's controversial to say that, but Inquisition's kind of like badass, you know? Get rid of all the demons and which is like, it's pretty badass if you think about it. Like,
The church began to categorize necromancy and other forms of magic as heretical and akin to devil worship. Interestingly, this was also when Goetic necromancy began to grow. This is a branch of necromancy that relates to summoning and controlling demons, as outlined in the grimoire, the Lesser Key of Solomon. Some of these demons, like Murmur and Bune, are said to have the power to bring deceased souls before the practitioner so that the practitioner could ask whatever question he wished. Goetic necromancy diverged from the traditional form, but it heavily draws from it. It wasn't devil worship, but it did involve demons and the dead. And so, necromancy, once seen as a means of divination or spiritual communication, became stigmatized as a dark and forbidden form of magic. In many places, necromancy was made illegal. As this viewer of our channel puts it, it was a dying art. But in reality, it continued in more secret forms and has seen a resurgence in modern times. While necromancy is no longer widely practiced as it was in ancient or medieval times and tends to hold negative connotations in magic as a forbidden dark art, there is still
I think some elites practice it, like
interest in this field.
has to do with black
In
magic.
certain occult communities, practices echoing traditional necromancy can still be found. These are aimed at communicating with the spiritual realm, although often in more symbolic contexts than as genuine attempts to communicate with the dead. You could also argue that modern mediums practice a form of necromancy, as their aim is to establish communication with the spiritual realm. While these practices are not typically classified as necromancy in a traditional sense, they do share the fundamental concept of contact with the deceased. But they operate within a different ethical and cultural framework, and tend to focus on personal spirituality and healing, rather than on the more arcane objectives historically associated with necromancy. There's something about necromancy that just captures the imagination, whether you're for it or against it.
I don't even think it's like a contact with disease. I think it's like a ploy by, demonic beings to get them to trick you, sell their soul, or like a contract. So you get the bad end of the stick. Like spirits and astral beings existed, but I don't think like necromancy is like it actually works kind of like it works.
At its core, it touches on the profound mysteries of death and the afterlife, themes that have intrigued humanity throughout history. There are numerous examples of this
Maybe it works if it's in the Old Testament, so maybe it works.
forbidden practice in popular culture and media, from ancient to modern times. For example, Shakespeare often included aspects of necromancy in his works, including Hamlet and Macbeth. Other popular examples include Game of Thrones, where the Night King wields the power to raise the dead, and the Harry Potter series with its Resurrection Stone and the Eerie Inferi, who are zombie-like puppets. These stories captivate audiences by exploring the boundaries between life and death. This widespread representation of necromancy in media reflects a continued fascination with the idea of communing with the beyond, a concept both
All these movies just uses predictive programming,
alluring and unsettling at the same time. It represents the human desire to understand life's mysteries, cope with the fear of death, and find comfort in the possibility of an afterlife. What do you think? Does necromancy have positive aspects, or is it a dark art to be avoided? Let us know.
Yeah, I don't think it has any positive aspects. It should be avoided at all costs. Like, God ordains our lives for certain times. I don't think like you should go against a natural cycle. Like, it will fuck you up, and you always get the bad end of this deal. Always get the bad end of the stick. Like, you lose something, while astral beings always gain something. There's a reason why God prohibited it in that anime.
This is the most inhumane ritual in Full Metal Alchemist.
Guys, if you haven't watched Full Metal Alchemist, bro, I suggest you
Human
do it.
transmutation is a forbidden form of alchemy, as no one can play the part of God. This forbidden form comes in 4 types: resurrection, creation of artificial humans, chimeric alchemy, and soul-binding alchemy. Edward attempted to perform 2 of these, and paid a heavy price. The Elric brothers perform a human transmutation to resurrect their mother, but unfortunately no substance or matter is truly equivalent to a human soul, and the law of equivalent exchange cannot be satisfied. As a consequence, Edward loses his left leg, and Alphonse loses his entire body. Those who try to perform human transmutations are taken to the Gate of Truth to confront a godlike creature who bestows them immense alchemical and universal knowledge in exchange for physical and emotional suffering. To get Alphonse back, Edward performs soul-binding alchemy by drawing a blood rune into steel armor, then binding his brother's soul to it. He successfully pulls this off at the cost of his own right arm. This is the most...
Yeah. Guys, watch Full Metal Alchemist. It's one of like the greatest anime ever. Like, so crazy. Yeah. So don't perform any kind of necromancy. Like, don't engage in any like demonic or astral practices. Like, it will fuck your life up. So don't do it. Like, it's not gonna end well for you. So that's about it.